the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who kind of made a surprising pick, I would say, at pick 19, taking Emeka Egbuka, wide receiver out of Ohio State. What were your thoughts on that, Austin?
Yeah, I was a bit surprised because you could argue with them re-signing Chris Godwin in the offseason, it wasn't the biggest team need. But I loved the pick, dude. I thought it was an extremely safe pick. I wouldn't say it was necessarily the best player on the board at the time. I probably would have ranked Golden ahead of Emeka Egbuka if I had to rank receivers this year. But Emeka Egbuka is one of the safest picks in the draft, dude. He's just going to be a solid, dependable number 2 wide receiver. And I think he does fit into the offense despite them re-signing Chris Godwin. Plus, Chris Godwin hasn't been the most reliable as far as staying
Yep.
healthy is concerned. So that's also part of that. But I honestly believe you can get all 3 of the receivers on the field at the same time. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Emeka Egbuka on the field at the same time. With Baker Mayfield, we were just talking about before the show, Baker has become one of the better QBs in the league. Maybe not one of those top 8 elite QBs, but he's right there on the edge of that, I would say. So all of a sudden, dude, this offense is looking pretty good going into 2025.
Yeah, I'd say I don't. I like the position. I like attacking wide receiver. You can never have too many. I think you and I both would have had Luther Burden ahead of him in terms of just because then it makes me also think if you added Burden to this offense,
It's true.
that feels pretty special as well. But to your point, I would say Ibuka is probably the most consistent receiver of the class. He actually set the career reception record at Ohio State, which is pretty impressive considering how many guys have come out of there. But yeah, to your point, he does kind of fit what Chris Godwin does. And, he has been, you can't rely on him to be on the field as much lately. Mike Evans is also getting up there in age. I mean, he's still continuing his 1,000-yard streak. Had to fight for it at the end of this past season. But you can never have too much depth. And with an older receiver like Evans, and then also with Godwin's injury history, I think it makes sense to get a guy with that skill set that you can rely on. And pairing him with, McMillan from last year, which I was a big fan of that pick. They still have Jalen McMillan. And, they signed Sterling Shepard. They still have Trey Palmer as well. So start to have a pretty deep
It's a loaded wide receiver class, man.
around Baker Mayfield.
Yeah. I agree, dude. That's a loaded wide receiver core, dude. And I think Emeka Egbuka will probably be a starter in that, even if Chris Godwin is healthy.
Yeah.
So, again, it's not the flashiest first round pick. It is a receiver, but Emeka Egbuka is not the flashiest receiver. But I do agree with you. Luther Burden would have been pretty intriguing in this offense, or even Matthew Golden, like I mentioned. So, but I think they overall, with a team that is close, right? I mean, this is a team that's been competing in the NFC year in, year out now. They're still a bit away from the Eagles, I would say. But a team that's close, getting a safe guy like Emeka Egbuka who will be productive, I think that made sense.
Yeah, and to that point, what some people have kind of equated their draft to was hitting it down the fairway. You just taking more of the safe picks, guys that you just know are good football players. A little bit of injury history with the next guy we'll talk about. So they then double up at corner with 2 guys I know we're both big fans of. Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame and Jacob Parrish out of Kansas State. For those that don't know, Benjamin Morrison had a pretty bad hip injury that put him out for most of this past season, and is really the reason he didn't go in the first round. I mean, in terms of tape-wise, the guy was probably up there with like Will Johnson if he was healthy too, but in terms of just the best corner in this class, incredibly consistent. He's one of those guys where he just rarely gets beat. And obviously the health concerns are a big part of that now. But getting a guy like him in the second round and to then also pair with Jacob Parrish in the third is pretty solid.
Yeah, I love taking the chance on Benjamin Morris, man. Like you said, he is absolutely a first round talent if he didn't have that hip issue coming out of Notre Dame. Now, listen, the hip issue is a legitimate reason for him to fall to the second round. Hips are pretty important for cornerbacks, so that's definitely something we're going to have to keep an eye out on in the NFL. But I still love taking that kind of risk because yes, it could backfire, but you could also get a first round talent in the back end of the second round. So I love the Benjamin Morrison pick, and then Jacob Parrish is a massive athlete, great like really good speed. So he's interested too for depth. I love how they doubled up at corner in the second and third round. They clearly saw that as a
Yep.
big need and that they needed attack in the offseason. And again, I've said this to you a lot, Dakota, but for some of our listeners who haven't listened, I just love that strategy, dude. I love doubling up at a position like cornerback because it increases your hit rate. Now you are much more likely to find either one of those two guys end up being a starter. So I like doing that as a strategy.
Completely agree. And, after losing Murphy Bunting and they still have Jamel Dean, they kind of hit on those corners a while back that were in later rounds. But now they had same things actually true with Zion McCollum, who's outplayed being a 5th-round pick. But they definitely needed depth and they needed more guys in that room. And two guys, kind of to your point, that have different skill sets where, Benjamin Morrison's really great in man coverage. He's going to be a guy that plays outside, where Jacob Parrish's athleticism and the way he plays, he could play anywhere. So you could could put him in the slot, or he can play outside wherever you need him. So I love doubling up at corner there. And then they continue that trend and they double up at edge.
Yep.
So they take David Walker out of Central Arkansas and then Elijah Roberts out of SMU. David Walker's a really interesting one because he kind of dominated at that level with Central Arkansas. So not at like the D1 top of FBS level. But he had the high athleticism as well. He's a pretty athletic guy. So the questions there are just around, he didn't do it against high level competition. And I think he didn't look the best when at the Senior Bowl, but a guy that clearly knows how to produce regardless. And then with Elijah Roberts, a guy who also tested pretty well, not as productive. He's a late round pick for a reason. But another guy to get in there who was an honorable mention All ACC this past season.
Yeah, I mean, I'll again like doubling up at edge, and David Walker is intriguing. Like you said, it's really just the competition question marks, and I think Elijah Roberts could turn into something as well. And you can never have too many edge rushers, man. You really can't, and they've really been attacking that the last few years. Now, are you going to find an elite guy, a game changer in the 4th and 5th round? Probably not. But as we've seen with the Eagles, man, this whole offseason, people will keep talking about defensive line depth. So it makes total sense for them to go back at back edge rushers.
And honestly, it makes me wonder if Tampa Bay is paying attention to PFF a bit. Because if you look at all these guys they drafted, they were all pretty high graded players, which is interesting because all these teams work with PFF, obviously. But David Walker did well from pass rush perspective, but also had a 92.6 run defense grade this past season, which is insane. And then Elijah Roberts has posted a 90 plus pass rush grade the past 2 seasons. So they clearly, those are the things that project. PFF, people can say what they will about them, but specifically edge rushers, their PFF, the grading for them has been pretty good indicator on whether or not they'll translate to the NFL. And then they round things out with Tez Johnson, a guy I think people are surprised fell mainly due to the lack of athleticism at his size. He's an incredibly interesting prospect at 5'10", 154, ran a 4.51, which I think put him in a percentile of like one of the slowest for a sub like 170 weight athlete or whatever. But a productive guy at Oregon, though.
Yeah, he was extremely productive, dude. It was all about the workout. The workout absolutely killed him and his stock. But again, adding to this absolutely loaded, this is honestly looking at it, dude, and talking through it. This might be the deepest wide receiver core in the NFL. It's going to be hard to get all these guys the ball because, like you said, I actually really liked how Jalen McMillan looked in his rookie season. You add Sterling Shepard, it's like I don't see how Sterling Shepard's going to play. Like somebody's got to go. And I feel like Tez Johnson could be productive for this team, even though he was a 7th round pick. Because like you said, he was an extremely productive college player. So, but the lack of athleticism will definitely hurt in the NFL. We'll just have to see on that. But in the 7th round, taking an extremely productive player with like low athleticism, that to me makes a lot of sense, man. It's just like that's how you should use your 7th round picks. Instead of drafting special teams players, draft a receiver that with his high production has high upside, even though he is not a great athlete. So I loved that making that pick, and this receiving core is pretty scary, dude, and very deep.
And even though he's not that athletic, like watching his tape, he still just gets open.
Yeah,
Like he's a very good route runner, so he does provide a completely different body type and skill set to the receivers they have as well, which is why, like to your point, he could find his way onto the field as a seventh round draft pick. And I think I don't want to speak incorrectly, but I'm pretty sure it was against Zaire Thomas, corner out of Florida State at the Senior Bowl when they did one
oh,
on
he's
ones that he
cooking.
absolutely
Yeah,
cooked and
yeah,
may have like directly been responsible for him dropping in the draft. So he may not have elite athleticism, but he still manages to get open against good corners. So it would be really interesting to see him alongside, new teammate Emeka Egbuka and Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, and Jalen McMillan at incredibly deep wide receiver room. So Bucs go double wide receiver, double corner, double edge, attacking all of the most valuable positions
exactly.
outside of quarterback.
I love it. I just love that process, dude. They have their guy, they have their franchise guy. So load up at the other most valuable positions. Absolutely love that for the Bucks. I thought they had a really solid draft.
And they also had a handful of interesting few DFAs as well. We try to touch on those. They had some of the most interesting. So Connor Bazelak, quarterback from Bowling Green, who was at Missouri originally and then transferred. He was the starter at Missouri for a minute, so they get him. They also invited Texas State quarterback Jordan McLeod to minicamp, who kind of broke out this past season there. And then an interesting one, Garrett Green, the quarterback from West Virginia. They apparently are signing him to try him out at receiver,
Yeah,
which is fascinating. He is
it
very
is.
athletic. So with this receiver room, though, I don't know if he's going to find a way onto that roster.
Yeah, it's gonna be
Um,
tough.
yeah, they also get Shiloh Sanders, so the other Sanders that was in this draft. And then the most interesting one, Desmond Watson,
Desmond Watson.
460 pounds of man from Florida. That gives them now the smallest person in the NFL and the largest.
Yep, it sure does, dude. And someone had a brilliant idea I heard the other day to have Vita Vea lead block for Desmond Watson on an end zone carry. That'd be literally the most terrifying backfield ever assembled in NFL history. Yeah, Desmond Watson's interesting because he, for someone who is literally the heaviest player to ever play football at like any like legitimate level, Desmond Watson moved pretty good. Like he was actually not an awful player. Now I have heard he's already lost like 30 pounds, and dude, I mean,
Yeah, he probably should.
he's dude, yeah, exactly. Just for his health, he should lose 30 pounds. But I mean, honestly, he could lose about 50 to 80 more pounds. So it's going to be interesting to see what like if he actually makes a team or what his NFL career will look like. But it is fascinating that they brought in literally the largest player in NFL history and the smallest player in NFL history in one offseason.
And he is literally three times at the listed weight. He was three times the size of Tez Johnson, which is fascinating. And if he is around that weight at their current weights, him and Vita Vea next to each other on the D line would be over 800 pounds of
That's
defensive
insane.
line to go through.
Oh,
Let's
that's
say stop
wild.
the tush push.
Yeah, I mean, people did call him the tush push stopper, which
Yeah.
I honestly don't hate that as a roster spot, dude. Because what did we just talk about? The Bucks are one of the best teams in the NFC.
Yeah.
One of the teams they have to get through is the Philadelphia Eagles. So there you go.
Love it. With that in mind, what was your favorite pick for the Bucks?
Oh, that is a good question. I will have to say, man, I love the value of Tez Johnson in the 7th round. I just think there's not many 7th round picks that I look at and like, oh, this could actually be a impactful 7th round pick. But I think Tez Johnson is one of the few. So I'll say Tez Johnson in the 7th.
Like it. I'm going to go Benjamin Morrison in the second then. Hip issue is there, right? You've got to be worried about his health. Will he be able to be what he was in 2023 in the beginning of 2024? But I love taking a gamble on that in the second round because if he hits, he's going to hit. Like he will be a staple cornerback for this team for a while. So love the value of him in the second. We do look at Renee Bugner, guy on Twitter, does excuse me, a composite grading system. So he takes about 20 to 25 different riders, their grades for each team's draft, and does essentially a composite to give it like a GPA. So we've been looking at those for each team as we've gone through these. Where did the Bucks come in at?
They are tied with a division rival. I will not give that away, but they are tied with a division rival at 11th. So, kind of like we were saying, man, with a team in the Bucs that didn't draft a lot, they hit on their draft picks as far as, what people feel about the players they got. So, I think they had a really, really good draft for what they had coming into the draft.
Yeah, I think so. With like a minimal, fewer picks, but I mean, again, I think this is indicative as what we've reiterated over and over again of how well everybody drafted. Because I feel like this type of draft 2 years ago would have probably been a top 5 one, to be honest. But
I agreed.
perfect. So that is the Bucs 2025 class.